Workistic, your work wellness resource on the go. A Thoughts to Inspire interview. At the Work Wellness Institute, the future of work starts with well-being. Dive into our Workplace Wellness Work Bites for summaries of our carefully curated trending webinars, published workplace research findings, and informative interviews with key industry subject matter experts. Learn and stay informed about work wellness anywhere, anytime with Workistic, your work wellness resource on the go. Welcome to our Thoughts to Inspire series, bringing together subject matter experts from across sectors to present evidence-informed, thought-provoking ideas and approaches. These interviews invite conversation and bring attention to the most pivotal and timely workplace wellness topics.
But I think that what you're talking about really speaks to this idea of, upskilling the employer now versus upskilling the individual, which has really been, I think, a target for a long time where, we're going to train the individual to work in an environment that may not be suited to them. Now, what I think you're trying to do, and maybe you can elaborate on this, is that you're looking at the workplace environment and making it a conducive environment to everybody, not just those with disabilities, but the larger, inclusive workplace approach.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I was just going to say you're bang on that I think we have for decades really in this space focused on trying to change the disabled person to fit into the workplace structures that we have. And here we're saying, no, we got to create inclusive spaces. And those inclusive spaces will be a place where diverse people with diverse abilities and diverse skills and expertise can thrive. So you're bang on, and this is consistent with the social model of disability. And Emile, you want to say a few things?
Exactly.
Well?
It's right on the mark. The diversity is key and central. Like that's why we sometimes describe it as EDIA maturity, equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility maturity. We're really focusing on the accessibility, the disability inclusion part of it, but it's part of a larger equation. People's social location, their identity is more than, even if they're a person with lived experience, more than just their disability. They have multiple layers to their identities. They might be, a recent immigrant, a racialized minority, LGBTQ plus, or indigenous. There's various parts of people's identities that define them, and some of those other layers can also further marginalize them. So, we want to make sure that we're thinking about the whole person, and an employer should be thinking about the whole person and how they can make a work opportunity work for somebody who has the talent that they're seeking to engage. And I think so you can't think about just their disability or just their racialized minority, whatever. You want to be inclusive of all that diversity, because that diversity often is the source of creativity and innovation, right? What people bring to the table is sometimes very unique, and their lens brings a new insights to the things that we do, and it helps create better outcomes for the organization because they bring something different to the table, and you want to celebrate that diversity. Everybody's unique, right? One of the things one of our colleagues says is one size fits one, right? Because you can't have one size fits all. You need to think about individualized needs, and we do it all the time for certain types of needs. Like we do accommodations for work-life balance for somebody who may have child caring responsibilities and needs a different schedule, or leaving work early or coming in late or whatever it might be. So we do it all the time, but somehow for some reason people think it's somehow different for persons with disabilities when it's not so different, right? And so we want to bring that into the equation, right? The other thing too is there is sometimes specific things you need to know about and resources you need to tap into when you think about disability accommodation. Sometimes it's different technologies or a different workstation or some other needs that a person has that can easily be solved if you know where to find the guidance or the resources to support the process.
I'm going to take that line and use it myself, like the one fits one scenario. So I'm going to have to talk to you later. And who did you take that from? Because I'm going to steal that at some point. So
go for it.
Yeah. Maybe on the downside a little bit, I'm going to ask you a question about the training process. Because we're talking about training employers here. And we know that what typically happens is an employer, and it's the best of intentions, and what they do is it's very sporadic in their training approach. So, today we're going to do a training course, we're going to do a lunch and learn, we're going to implement something today, and we hope that that's going to change culture in an organization and make us inclusive. How do we change to this sort of lifelong mindset, this lifelong learning? How do we change cultures in the workplace to address these issues versus, hey, we're going to do the Friday lunch and learn or the Monday morning in-service training session?
Yeah. And that's really the $1 million question, right? And we're not the only ones who want to change organizational culture to be more inclusive. There's a deep need to look at culture within organizations, and it's come up as with the passing of the Canadian Disability Act, and like there's a lot going on in this space that's changing the way we think of inclusion and um, the role that people with disabilities can play in the workplaces, the diverse roles that people with disabilities can take on in workplaces. So I would say culture change is huge, but I think we're at a pivotal moment where we have that opportunity for culture change. And I know Emile has some things to say about this because he has worked in this space. But one thing I'll just say is that the pandemic really created, as horrible and as negative as the last few years has been. I think in the context of the workplace, it made us realize that we need to be flexible, we need to be agile, and workers. Have expectations for health in the workplace, and they have expectation for quality, for benefits, and for employers to really care about their well-being. And one of the things that came out of the pandemic is a pretty severe labor shortage. And so, employers who want to be successful in recruiting the labor that they need within their organizations have come to realize that they have to take time to create healthy workplace cultures, or they're not going to be able to retain staff, and they're not going to be able to retain quality workers. So it's in that mindset of a labor shortage that we have this opportunity to really change culture within organizations. But Emile, I know you've specifically looked at this issue and probably have a bit more to say.
Excellent points. No, that's super great points. And just getting back to some of the other aspects of your question about not thinking you can just do this once and you're done with, right? I'm a big proponent of the notion of continual improvement. In management systems, it's a very common thing to have the notion of continual improvement built into the way organizations operate in certain areas of their activities. It's in the speak of standards, they call it PDCA, or Plan, Do, Check, Act. But I think I take that philosophy to everything, right? There's always room for improvement, and we should always be looking for ways to improve. And the environment around us is always changing too. So you always have to do a scan of saying, what's changing? What do I need to do to adapt? How can I do better, kind of thing? So build it into the way you run your business, right? Thinking that the market's changing, the technology's changing, the talent pool is changing maybe too, in terms of you needing to tap into different talent pools, that kind of thing. So you always have to take that lens at thinking about how can we do better. And the most productive, effective organizations are taking that to the nth degree, always thinking about how we can do better. And management systems are, as I said, are built into the Z 1011, which I was the chair for the technical committee. That's a work disability management system standard. It's built around this plan, do, check, act, continual improvement notion. The employment standard that is just out for public review from Accessibility Standards Canada. I was on that technical committee. I did the disability management component of it with a bunch of colleagues that were on that committee. And there too, we built in this notion of continual improvement. So I think as people, we should be doing that with lifelong learning, right? Because we always have new things to learn, and we can never know it all, right? And as organizations, we need to do that. As a society, we need to do that, right? It's never a done deal. We've dealt with it. It's done with it. We can close the door. It's always looking at how can we do better, and that's how we can be productive, engaged citizens, a productive society, by always thinking about what's on the horizon and how can we adapt to this environment and improve on what we're doing.
Maybe get your opinion on this. We talked a little bit about the pandemic and the disruption that it caused. And I think that really, a lot of people sort of, their ears perked up, or at least they, for the first time, started thinking about healthy workplaces and creating, cultural change in their workplace to address issues like labor market needs. And, I'm not going to say we got to the end of the pandemic, but a lot of the restrictions have been taken off at this point. And organizations, tried keeping that sort of flexible workplace environment, which I think really worked from a mental health perspective to be very inclusive. But are you seeing a shift back at this point to sort of the old sort of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday? Is that happening now? Or are we still in a stage, from your perspective, are we still in a stage where, employers are still thinking about mental health in the workplace or inclusivity and what a flexible workplace really means for those with disabilities and other issues? And any one of you or both of you can answer that.
Yeah. Emile, do you want to get started? I have a few things to say as well.
You go ahead.
Okay. So I think it's a mixed bag, really. But what I will say is that the technology is not going to disappear. So I think what the pandemic showed us is that there are many jobs that can be done, at least in part, remotely and in a flexible way. And we can't completely peel that back. So I think there is also some acknowledgement of the importance of building a supportive workplace that involves some human connection and in relationships in different ways. So coming back to more in-person work, whatever that may look like, I think is also a positive thing and helpful, because support at work in different ways is actually really important. But the flexibility of being able to do some parts of a job or all parts of a job remotely and in a bit more of a flexible way, I don't think that's going anywhere. And it's quite a powerful tool. I think for people with disabilities prior to the pandemic, one of the biggest barriers to work was transportation. And in different ways. For some people, it was actually the mobility issue. For some people, they lived in remote rural areas. It's hard to, public transit is not really existent. For some people, so there's different layers to the transportation barrier, but it was a really big barrier to employment. And I do think that the flexibility of being able to work remotely, either fully or in part, has really changed that landscape for many people. So I think that flexibility is here to stay, and we can only build on it and capitalize on it. And I think it's a positive thing, because it allows employers, and it's a powerful tool for employers, because it allows employers to be able to look at who's the best job candidate, who's the best person to do this job, rather than being limited by some of the things that could previously limited who they could hire into a job.
Yeah.
So there's more to say on that, but that
Yeah,
maybe is
no,
a
no,
starting point.
yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
definitely. It's been a learning curve, but there's a silver lining that we realize we can do things differently, right? When push comes to shove, we had to pivot, right, and find new ways of working, and it worked for a lot of people. In fact, there was a benefit, as Rebecca saying, for lots of people who found transportation challenges for a variety of reasons, living remotely, having mobility issues, having anxiety, dealing with the hubbub of a busy downtown core, trying to navigate, less than perfect transportation systems in Toronto or whatever it might be. It can be a challenge, right? So suddenly that's not such a big issue, right? And technology continues to advance all the time and new ways of working, not just about remote work, but just how we work, right? And we need to embrace those changes and build on them so that we can be more productive and engage in different ways. So there's some learning involved for sure. It's a bit scary at the front end. And change is always scary. But if once you confront that fear, you realize, okay, well, actually, there's lots of opportunity here to be new and innovative.
Yeah. Yeah. The pandemic is just one disruptive event that we had. We're going to have more, right? That's kind of what I've been saying around here quite often. May not be a pandemic, but AI is a disruptive event, for example. And around here, we're looking at the impact of AI on sort of worker health at this point. Are they afraid of it? What kind of sort of psychosocial hazard is that on employees?
Yeah.
Rebecca, maybe I can get you to elaborate on this question a little bit, because you did touch on it a bit. But what are, I don't think you can speak for every person with a disability, but what are employees with disabilities looking for in the workplace? We've got HR practitioners that are listening to this podcast. What do you say to them? What is that person looking for in your organization that would attract them to apply for a job there?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think sometimes employers are like the hesitancy that sometimes we see in hiring people with disabilities is grounded in fear. And it's fear of something different, but also fear of cost or fear of litigation or fear of doing something wrong. And the the things that I think make a big difference when we're looking at workplaces that are inclusive are two things that are actually pretty simple and, um, uh, you know, inexpensive and probably not as fancy or technological as people might assume. And the first thing that I would say that makes a big difference is flexibility. And, different workplaces have different capacities to be flexible. But whenever there's an opportunity for flexibility, that can increase inclusion. So, sometimes a workplace has a bit more rigidity in the scheduling because certain things have to happen at certain times of day, or they might have the need for people to be in a certain place at a certain time. But there's other ways in which they can be flexible. And whenever there's opportunity to be flexible, the more flexibility that can be built into workplace processes, the more it will be inclusive for different types of people. So that's number one. And quite frankly, flexibility, we're not looking at huge costs. It's really about doing things differently. So it's change, which is sometimes difficult, but the more flexibility that can be incorporated into an organization, or that's great. The other piece is culture, and culture is a bit more elusive and hard to pinpoint. But I think some of the work we've done to date has suggested that the way you can create a culture of inclusion is by creating a space where you're when people are requesting accommodations, that the response is yes by default, that you're really trying to create places where, and Emile, I know some of your work has highlighted this as well, and some of the work we've done together, where if you can create a space where people or HR professionals or managers are regularly sort of thinking, what can I do to support you? What do you need to thrive as a worker within this organization? What can we do? Then you're creating a place where people feel valued, and that actually goes a long way. So those are two really simple things that can create a workplace that will be really inclusive for people with disabilities.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Having a people-oriented culture is critical, that you're really focused on making it work. And the concept that Rebecca mentioned, it hits the nail right on the head. Yes, by default, right? And that's one of the principles in the Inclusive Employment Standard, the Accessibility Standards Canada has launched for feedback, is thinking about, when somebody asks for something they need for work to work for them, you would want to start off with the idea that, okay, well, they know what their needs are, right? You would try to make that work, that happen, right? So yes, by default, another thing I've heard Mark Wafer used to talk about this a lot. He asked the person, the person knows what their situation is and how their work, what their work challenges are and what might be the possible solution. So you work with the person jointly, the supervisor, manager, the organization works with the person with the intention of making it work as best it can, and looking to make those accommodations. Another thing someone mentioned to me in one of the conversations I had with them, I think it's Tammy Yates, talking about accessibility might just get you in the door, right? Inclusion means maybe you're part of the team, but ultimately you really want to belong, right? Being part of the fabric of the organization, that you're truly valued, that you feel that you are valued for what you contribute to the organization, and that you're important to that organization. And that's the attitude that an organization supervisors and managers need to bring to the table when they work with their workforce, is that they value them, that they really believe that they have something important to contribute and value their contributions, so that they really feel like they belong.
So I fully admit this, I'm old, right? This is my second career kind of thing, or third career if you want to look at it that way. My approach, I've worked in a system that has been sort of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. That's been kind of the career. Without, nobody talked about flexibility. It was about, you're supposed to be here at 8:59 in the morning and you can leave at 5:01. That's kind of the world I grew up in. So it's been, I think, a challenge for me to take this approach about doing things differently, is I think what each of you has kind of alluded to. Mm-hmm. How do you get through to people of sort of my ilk, that changing workplace cultures is good for their organization, being flexible? Around here, we adopted the 4-day work week, and we're involved in that research project. That for me is just a completely new approach to doing things differently. How do each of you think we need to talk to leaders of organizations and say, like, being flexible is good for your organization? And Dr. Tompa, I'm sure you've got an economic argument for that, but I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I can relate. I mean, I grew up in graduate school, we're still doing things on a typewriter, so we didn't have computers. so but I've learned, we have all adapted, into different degrees of success. I know I'm still a Luddite, but I'm still learning. But that's fine. We have to understand that people bring different things to the table, different talent, that institutional knowledge that older people in the workforce bring to the table is absolutely critical. I mean, I've heard many case studies where those people leave and the organization is lost as to what to do and are reinventing the wheel constantly, kind of thing. So everybody brings something different to the table. But, I think the flexibility is serving lots of people well. I mean, the people just transitioning maybe out of the labor market appreciate, 4 days a week, transition to retirement, maybe doing 3 days a week, somebody with different needs, just getting into the labor market might find that helpful too, sort of thing. So I know in the Netherlands, it's an obligation, I think, of employers to offer 3, 4, or 5 days a week, the worker can make that choice, for whatever reason it might be, right? And I think that's a wonderful idea. The flexibility works for the worker, and then you may have to have two people doing similar tasks but you're only paying them part of a week, right? So there's different creative ways you can tap into a diverse talent pool, kind of thing. But I think flexibility is key. I mean, as technology changes, as the way we work changes, as the world changes and how we connect with each other, whether it's through different platforms. Almost all of my meetings these days are on Zoom or some other connectivity platform. You just get comfortable with that new ways of connecting, kind of thing. And there's always somebody there I find to turn to help me get up to speed when I'm struggling with the technology, kind of thing. So we all bring different things to the table, but I do think that learning is part of being a active person in a particular space, in a particular organization.
Dr. Gerwurtz, do you have any sage words of advice to how we get through to leadership on these topics?
I think outcomes and evidence will speak volumes. So I think we're far enough along in this where, I think at the end of the day, we're, employers and managers really want results. And, I do think that if we just sort of say, let's try this, let's see, is productivity really going to drop the way you fear it does? Does, bums and chairs really equal better products in the work that you're trying to do, and the goals you've set for the organization and the targets you've set for the organization? There might be times where you can't be flexible, and that is also okay. But where we can build in flexibility, it means that people with young children, people with aging parents, people with health concerns, that all will allow people to contribute to the workplace. And so building in that flexibility can be a win-win, while also creating a more inclusive workplace. So I think we have to use the evidence and work through the impact it has on productivity.
As we wrap this up today, there's one thing I want to ask you. We've got HR practitioners, we've got vocational rehab, we have leaders, we have all kinds of individuals that are watching this podcast. If they had 3 takeaways from today for each of you, or from each of you, what would you want them to take away? What's your message to them today? So Dr. Tompa, I'll ask you first, and then Dr. Gerwurtz will go to you next.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so hopefully we'll have 6 really good suggestions from the two of us. So anyway, there's lots more than 6 even, let alone 3. But I'll try to think of the core things that we would suggest. Workplace stakeholders, anybody in the work disability policy system could think about and act on going forward. The first thing is a really simple thing, I would say, like just push past that fear factor, thinking that it's complicated and expensive, and just confront that and go get past it, kind of thing, because it's not necessarily complicated or expensive, and there's so much to be gained by tapping into that talent, right? The second thing I think is you're not in it alone. There's lots of great guidance out there. We're working on developing some new stuff. There's lots of things that our partners have done, and there's lots of stuff out there on the internet, various stuff like that. So connect with those organizations working in the field, and identify some of the amazing guidance and things that they're doing that are often free, and people willing to help. We're organizations that are in the public interest, trying to do a social good kind of thing through a knowledge to practice social innovation laboratory. Our work is open access, right? And a lot of these organizations' work is open access. So you don't have to figure it out all by yourself, right? So there's lots of great work out there that you can tap into. And I would just say, stay connected too. You alluded to earlier on that some people might think, okay, I've done it, it's done, dealt with it, I can close the door. No, stay connected. This this space is growing. There's new ideas being generated all the time and resources being created regularly. The technology in particular is changing as rapidly as well. And there's going to be some great solutions, I think, with the technology. It's not a scary thing. Even if you're a Luddite like me, there's always somebody who can willing to help me figure out how to work with it, kind of thing. And it opens up a whole new opportunity for you as an individual, for an organization, kind of thing. Like we've talked about the COVID stuff and technologies advancing for connecting virtually, kind of thing. Really great resource for people going forward. It's not going to go away, right? That kind of thing. So I think those would be my 3 key takeaways.
Awesome. Dr. Gerwurtz, I know you've got something to add.
Yeah. So some of mine are similar. I was going to say that we actually, my one takeaway would be that we actually have the capacity to make real inroads in this space, but we have to work together. And so there's not really any room to blame or point fingers, but really to sort of together support what everybody needs to make progress in this space. The second one, I just think it's so important to counteract the narrative that hiring people with disabilities is expensive and difficult. And this relates to what Emile said around fear, but really tackling it head on, that there might be some upfront costs and or upfront efforts, but that there's going to be a payoff down the road, and that it is worth an organization's effort to think about building inclusion and what that would look like within their organization. And then the last takeaway would be that there's a unique opportunity right now, and I would encourage everybody, all organizations from diverse fields, to really try to capitalize on the opportunity right now to think about how to potentially do things differently in ways that create more inclusion and more accessibility for a diverse workplace, a diverse workforce.
Yeah. So, one of the things you mentioned about the patchwork of regulations and requirements across different jurisdictions, and we're a federation, so there's provincial, there's territorial, there's federal. But I would suggest people look past that. It's not about fulfilling the minimum requirements of the law, but being better for yourself as an organization, for your workforce, for your client base, because it's, as Rebecca pointed out, it's in your best interest, to expand your client base. There's 20% of the Canadian population identifies persons with disabilities. They're your clients, they're your workforce, right? They're your family, probably in lots of cases. So do it for yourself and your workforce and your client base, and it'll be a payoff at the end of the day. And don't think about, I have to do it as a minimum requirement to the law. That's my starting point is that you start there and move beyond it very quickly.
Yeah, I know we talk about 20% of the population identifying as a disability. I have a background in healthcare, and I say at some point we will all be a patient. No matter what. And I think similarly, at some point, we will all have a disability, mobility, hearing, whatever it may be. And so I think that's my starting point often. Mm-hmm. However, I would like to thank both of you for being here today and making the time, sharing your expertise with us today. I found the discussion really interesting, and I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing what comes out of the project that we've been talking about, the IDEA Social Innovation Lab. I think it's got potential to really make an impact across the Canadian landscape. And so I appreciate and thankful for you picking up that ball and running with it. And again, for being here today. So thank you.
And thank you for having us. It's a delight to have this opportunity to speak with you about what we're doing, and we will definitely stay connected.
Thank you very much.
Continue your learning and connect with us at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.